In this Blender tutorial, I'll show you how to create this procedural scratched metal material. So after we create the procedural material, I'll show you how to join the material together into this custom node group so that you can control the look of the material. So we first have the overall scale to change the size of the entire material, and then we have this metallic value if you want it to look less metallic or more metallic, and then we have two different colors for the metal. So we have metal color 1, and then we also have this other color for the metal color 2. Then we have the noise scale, so if you just want to change the size of the noise, maybe make the noise really small, you could change that. And then we have the scratches scale. So if I zoom way into this object here, kind of to the reflections, you can see there's these little scratches. You can especially see it right there. So this scratches scale is going to make the scratches much smaller or much bigger. And then we also have the scratches color. So if you want to make the scratches really dark, you can see that's where the scratches are. You can see them really well if I make them really light colored, but I'm just going to have them like a mid-gray color. And then we have the roughness of the metal. So if you want really shiny metal or really rough metal, you can change that. And then we have the metal bump strength. So this is just the overall bump of the material. And then we have the scratches bump strength. So if you want the scratches to be much more bumpy, you can turn that up there. And if you'd like to purchase this procedural material and help support the channel, you can get this material on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page. The links are in the description. And to purchase all of my materials, definitely check out my Ultimate Blender Procedural Material Pack, which comes with all of my procedural materials pre-set up for Blender's asset browser with custom thumbnails, sorted catalogs, and customizable node groups. And you can also purchase all of my materials individually on my Gumroad store. And if you'd like to learn how to create any of my procedural materials, then definitely check out my Blender Procedural Material tutorial playlist here on YouTube. All the links are in the description. So real quick, I'll show you what I have set up in the 3D viewport if you want to set up the blend file the same way that I have. So I went to the add menu and I added an icosphere just because I want to preview this material on a sphere. And then right after you add the icosphere, if you click right behind me on that little add icosphere settings, just open this up. I'm going to turn the subdivisions up to 6 so it is nice and smooth and round. And I'll close the add icosphere settings, and I can use the object context menu and shade the object smooth. Then I also thought it would be cool to add this object to a cylinder. So I'm going to add this to a cylinder, but of course you can add it to whatever object you want. And I'm going to move the cylinder over, and then I'm going to go into edit mode, and I'm going to add some loop cuts to the cylinder. So you can press Ctrl R to add loop cuts, and I'm going to add some loop cuts there. And then also if I go to the face select, I'll select this face and I'll press I to inset that face. So there's another loop there, and then select the bottom face and inset that as well. So if you go back to object mode now, you can press Ctrl 2. Ctrl 2 is going to give it a subdivision surface modifier, and so you can see by adding the loop cuts there, it is just nice and smooth there on the edges. And then we can shade that object smooth as well. And then both of these objects, I scaled them down to like a 0.2, so hit enter. And then also this object, I might scale it down just a little bit more. And why I'm scaling them down is because the default objects in Blender are kind of large. They're a bit larger than an average human, so I'm just scaling this down to a much better size for the material. And let's just bring this over here. And then I need to press Ctrl A and just apply the scale. So these are the object's new default size. And then I also added a camera, and I just pointed the camera at the object. Now for the lighting, if you go right over here to the world properties, I added in this Dam Bridge 1K HDRI. This is a free HDRI from polyhaven.com. The link will be in the description if you'd like to download the same HDRI that I'm using. So once you download the HDRI, you can click on the yellow dot here next to color, and you can choose environment texture and then just open up the HDRI. And this will give some nice realistic lighting and reflections in the 3D scene. So if I go into the camera view, you can kind of see that lighting. Now also I added these different area lights right here to get some nice lighting. So I added this bright area light here, and this is just shining kind of on the front, and I set the power to 40 and just have it as a white color kind of for a main light. And then all of these lights back here, these ones I set the power to 10, and they made them kind of like a yellowish color, so they kind of add a yellow rim light to the edges. So you can see by adding the lights there kind of is like a yellow tint there on the metal. So I added one there, I also added another one here, and also one here, and then also one here on the bottom, kind of adding a nice yellow light there to that cylinder object. Now, if you want to make the world background transparent so that you can't see the world in the background, you can go here to the render properties, and you can open up the film tab, and you can just checkmark the transparent button, so that way you can't see the world in the background, but it will still light the 3D scene. And then also, if you want to make the colors look nicer, I am using the view transform of Filmic here on the color management, and then also the look here, I set this to very high contrast to pop out the colors and make everything more contrasty and saturated. And then I also am using the Cycles rendering engine because I am going for realism. So I'm now in the shading workspace. So I have the 3D viewport right over here, and I'm in the rendered mode. And then I have the shader editor right over here. So I'll select the object and I can click on new, and I can just call this Scratched Metal. And then I want to add this material to the other object. So what I can do is just click and drag on this material, and I can actually drop the material onto that other object as well. So you can see they both have the same material. And then I also am going to be using the Node Wrangler add-on in the tutorial to preview the different nodes. So if you don't have the Node Wrangler enabled, you can click on Edit, and you can go to the Preferences. And then here in the User Preferences, if you go to Add-ons, you can go to the Search, and you can type in Node Wrangler and just enable the Node Wrangler add-on so it's built into Blender, and I'll show you how to use the add-on in the video. So let's close the User Preferences. So I'm going to start by making the textures for the scratches. So to do this, I'll go to the Add menu, and I'm going to search for a Voronoi texture. Let's drop the Voronoi up here. And then with the Voronoi texture selected, I'm going to press Ctrl T, and that is going to add the texture coordinate and mapping nodes. And then also to use the Node Wrangler, let's Ctrl Shift and select the Voronoi texture to preview the Voronoi texture on the object. Now I want to use the object coordinates because the object coordinates is going to place the texture on the object more evenly. So let's put the object into the vector. So now let's change the Voronoi settings. So right here on the F1, I'm going to change this to distance to edge, and you can see it's going to give us these little lines here, and that is going to be the scratches. And then I want to turn the scale up to like a 50 so you can see more of it. And then I'll also turn the detail to like the max of 15. So you can see if I zoom in there, there's going to be much more small scratches. And then this roughness here, I'll turn to like a 0.75. And I'll leave the other settings how they are. Now this Voronoi texture is really hard to see, it's really dark, so let's go to the Add menu, and we're going to search for a color ramp. And we'll put the color ramp after the Voronoi. So we can now use these two tabs here on the color ramp, and we can make it more contrasty. So I'm going to drag this white tab way over, and so you can see if there is more white on the color ramp, it's going to be lighter. So now you can actually see those cracks better. So now what I want to do is keep my nodes nicely organized. So I'm going to click and drag to box select both of these nodes, and I'm going to join them together into a frame by pressing Ctrl J. So this is just a nice way to organize the nodes. And then if I select the frame and press F2 to add a label, I'm going to call this mapping. Alright, so we now have this Voronoi and this color ramp, but I want to add another Voronoi and another color ramp to make some more scratches. And then we're going to mix both of the scratch textures together. So with these two nodes selected, I'm going to press Ctrl Shift D. So Ctrl Shift D will duplicate the nodes, but it's going to keep the wires plugged up. And then let me Ctrl Shift and select this color ramp here to preview it. So let's change some of this Voronoi texture settings. So for this one, I'm going to turn the scale to like 114 so that they are much smaller, but then all the other settings I will leave how they are. So if I Control Shift and select both of these, you can see that now we have two different amounts of scratches, some bigger ones and some smaller ones. So I now want to mix the bigger ones and the smaller ones together. So to do that, I'll go to the Add menu, and we're going to search for the Mix Color node, because the Mix Color can mix two different colors together. So we're going to take this top one and we're going to put that into color A, and then this bottom one, that is going to go into color B. And then I can Control Shift and select this mix to preview it. So what I want to do is just add the dark values, because if I preview this texture here, you can see that the black values are darker, and so that's where the cracks are. So I just want to add the dark values. So let's Control Shift and select this mix again. So on the mix type here, I can change this to darken, and then if I turn the factor 1, it's just going to add the dark values. So now you can see we have the bigger and smaller cracks mixed together. So let's box select all of these nodes, and we'll join them together into a frame by pressing Ctrl J, and I can select the frame and add a label by pressing F2, and I can call these scratches. Now I don't want these scratches to be all over the place, I just want them to be in some patchy areas here and there. So we're going to create another texture and use that texture as a mask to just make the cracks in some spots. So to do that, I'll go to the Add menu, and I'm going to search for a noise texture, and we're going to stick the noise texture here, so just drag it like somewhere in here into the frame, and I can pull it up here. So now I also want to use the object coordinates, so let's take the mapping vector, and I can put that into the vector of the noise texture. And let's just Control Shift and select the noise texture to preview it. Now on the settings here, I want to turn the scale up to like a 35, and let's also turn the detail up to the max of 15, so it is very detailed. And the roughness here, I'll turn this up to like a 0.75. 7.3. Now I want to make this more contrasty because it's pretty gray right now, so I can select one of the color ramps and I can press Shift D to duplicate it, and I can drop it here next to the noise texture, so after the noise. And then if I change these values, so drag the white and black tabs, that'll change the contrast. So I'm going to drag the black tab to about here and the white tab to about there. So now we have a really good mask for just where the cracks are going to be, or where the scratches are going to be. So I want to now mix them together. So I'll just select this mix color node and I'll press Shift D to duplicate it and drop it here. And then let's just drag it up here above this one. So because this color ramp is a mask telling where it's going to be, let's put the color into the factor. And then I can Control Shift and select the darken. So now I can take this darken here, and this is going to be the combined scratches, and we're going to put that into color A. So then we can Control Shift and select the darken. So then here on the darken result, I'm going to change this to the lighten, and why I'm using the lighten is because if I Control Shift and select the top color ramp, just the dark parts are where those scratches are going to be, but then the white parts aren't going to have any scratches. So let's Control Shift and select the lighten, and then on this color here, color B, I just need to make this fully white. So now if I zoom out here, you can see there are a lot of scratches, but they're just in some spots here and there. But then I do want to make the entire thing a bit more contrasty, so I'm going to select one more of the color ramps, and I'll duplicate it with Shift D, and let's just drop it here, and we can use this color ramp to make it more contrasty. So I'm going to drag the black tab over here, and then the white tab I'll drag to kind of about here, so it's even more contrasty. All right, let's box select these nodes and just bring them out of the way. So that is going to be it for the scratches. Now, as well as creating the scratches, I also just want to create a base texture. So to do that, we'll go to the add menu, and we're just going to search for a noise texture. We'll just add some overall noise to the metal. Let's drop the noise texture down here, and I want to use the same mapping because I want to use the object coordinates. So we'll take the mapping vector, put that into the vector, and I can Control Shift and select the noise texture to preview it. Let's change some of the settings. So I'm going to turn the scale to like a 15, and then I'll also turn the detail to 15. So now it is more detailed. However, I want to have there be some roughness, but I want to add a little bit of variation just to make it more interesting so that some parts have more roughness and other parts have less roughness. So I'm going to be adding another noise texture, and that noise texture is going to go into the roughness. So I'll select the noise texture, I'll press Shift D to duplicate it, and let's drop it here. And then again, we want to use the vector, so we'll plug the vector into the vector here, the noise texture, so it's using the object coordinates. And I can Control Shift and select this noise texture to preview it. So for this one, I'm actually going to leave all the settings how they are, but I do want to make them more contrasty by adding a color ramp. So I'll go to the add menu, and I'm going to search for a color ramp. So let's drop the color ramp here after the noise texture, and then this color ramp can go into the roughness value of this noise texture. And then I can Control Shift and select the noise texture to preview it. So now if I drag the black and white values, that is going to control the roughness. So let me just zoom in here. If I make it more black, there isn't going to be quite as much roughness because black is going to equal 0. However, if I drag the white tab over instead, white is equal to 1. So if I drag the white tab over more and more, there's going to be much more roughness. So I'm going to drag the white tab to about here, and then also the black tab, I'll drag it to about there. Now I want everything to be a bit more rough, so I can click on this black tab, and I can actually make this a pretty light color. So I'm going to make it kind of like a light gray, something like that. So now if I zoom in here, you can see that part is like less rough, but then over here there is more roughness. So now I want to make the entire thing a bit more contrasty, so I'll go to the add menu, and again we're going to search for another color ramp, and we can put the color ramp after this noise texture here. And then I can just kind of drag these values together a bit more to make them a bit more contrasty, so something like that is a bit better. So let's zoom out here, and I want to keep the nodes nicely organized, so we'll box select all these nodes here, and I'll join them together into a frame, and then I want to select the frame, and let's add a label, and I can just call this like base texture. Alright, so we now have the scratches in the base texture, so I want to join both of them together, and then we'll add that to the base color. So to mix colors together, we can again go to the add menu here and search for a mix color. Let's drop this here. And then this base texture, we are going to first put that into the factor. And that'll determine what parts are going to be color A and then what parts are going to be color B. So I'm going to use color A and color B to make the actual colors for the metal. So for color A, I'm just going to make this kind of like a gray color. So maybe something like that, maybe a little bit darker. And then color B, this is going to be a very dark gray. So something like that. And if you want to use the exact same colors that I'm using, then you can go to color A, you can go to the hex value, and you can punch in 737373. And then here on the bottom one, color B, the hex value will be 323232. Alright, so that's going to be the main colors of the texture, but then I also want to mix in the cracks. So we'll take this mix node, we'll press Shift D to duplicate it, drop it here, and we can take the result and we can put that into color B. Now color A, this is going to be the colors of the scratches. But if I Control Shift and select the mix, we need to put something into the factor to actually tell this mix color where the scratches are going to be, and it'll put color A where the scratches are. So that is where the scratches come in. So this color can go into the factor, and now color A, if I drag this up and down, change the color, that is actually going to be the color of the scratches. And if you want to use the same scratches color that I'm using, the hex value will be 595959. And that's here on color A. So we can box select these nodes, we can join them together into a frame, and we can add a label, and we're going to call this like base color. So because this is the base color, we can take this mixed result here, and we can put that into the base color of the principled shader, and I can Control Shift and select the principled shader to preview it. And you can see that material is starting to look cool. However, I want to make it look like metal, so we need to make it more shiny and give it metallic value. So we'll turn the metallic up to 1, so it is looking more like metal, and then just for now, I can just turn the roughness down a bit. However, I do want the roughness to have a bit of variation so that some parts are more rough and other parts are less rough. So I can take this mixed result here, and we're going to put that into the roughness. Now I want to be able to control the roughness values better, so we can just change the colors by adding a color ramp. So we'll go to the add menu, we'll add a color ramp, just drop this here, and then we can change the colors. So let's click on the black tab, and if we make the black colors lighter, so if more of the color is light, it's going to be more rough. However, if it is more black, it's going to be more shiny. So here in this black color, let's just make this kind of like a darker gray, and then this one here, let's turn this down a bit so everything is a bit more shiny, so it's kind of like a light gray. And if you want to use the same exact colors that I'm using, then here on this first one, it'll be 939393 on the hex value, and then this second one here, this one is going to be CB, CB, CB. So now this is really starting to look like a cool metal material. And then also later on in the tutorial, when we create the custom node group, I want to be able to control the roughness values. So we can just add a node which will make the colors lighter or darker, and then that'll control the roughness. So if we go to the add menu, we can search for the hue saturation value, and let's stick it here after the color ramp. So the hue saturation value has this value, so we can change the value to make it more rough or more shiny. So let's box select these nodes, and I'll join them together into a frame, and I'll add a label, and we can just call this roughness. And then I also want to add some bump, because right now the material doesn't really have any surface bump, so let's add the bump. So the first thing that I want to add is just add some overall bump to the entire material. So let's go to the base color noise texture, and we can take the factor, and we can drag this all the way over here and stick it into the normal. Now there's some weird shading issues, and that is because we need to convert the black and white data from the noise texture into normal data that the shader can use. So I'll go to the add menu, we're going to search for a bump node, and we'll stick the bump node here in the wire, and then to actually convert it to normal data, we want the normal here to actually be going into the height value instead. So the noise texture needs to be going into the height value. And now you can see the metal looks super bumpy, but that is way too strong, and I want this material to be pretty shiny and smooth, so I'll turn the strength to just like a 0.05, so it is much more subtle. And then I do want to add one more layer of bump, and that is going to be the scratches. So here on the bump node, I'll press Shift D to duplicate it, and let's drop it here after the first one. So the normal can go through the normal, and so we now have this extra height value that we can add data into. So let's go up here to the scratches, and what we can do is just take this color ramp color here, and we can put this into the height value of the second bump. And so that is going to, again, convert it to bump data. So if I zoom in here, it's kind of hard to see the scratches. Let's just go over here to kind of the reflections. And I want to make these a bit stronger so they're easier to see. So I'll turn the strength up to just like a 0.1, and I can definitely see those scratches better. If you want to make them more and more bumpy, you can turn the scratches up. So now it's like super scratchy, but I just want to make the scratches a bit subtle, but you can definitely see those scratches just kind of around the material. So let's box select these nodes and join them together into a frame, and I can add a label, and let's just call this bump. And that is it for the procedural scratched metal. So I'm now going to show you how to join this together into a custom node group so it's easier to control the values. So what you can do is click and drag to box select all the nodes except the material output, and then to join it together into a node group, you can press Ctrl G. You can press the tab key to go in and out of the node group with the node group selected. So let's drag the group input over here, and I can just drag it out to make it bigger, and then I can give it a name. So I'm going to call this scratched metal. So then let's go back into the node group, and if we press the N key to open up the side panel, we have this interface here. If you go to this group tab, and I want to rename this. So instead of calling it BSDF, I'll just rename it to shader. So if I go outside of the node group, you can see that is now called shader. So if we go back into the node group with the tab key, I can go here to the group input, and we can add values up to the group input, and then that way we'll be able to control those values outside of the node group. So the first value that I want to control is the overall scale of the material. So this mapping node is plugged up to all the textures. So this scale will control the size of the entire material. So let's put the scale into the group input. And then if I click on the scale here, you can see that it's 3 values, but I just want to make it 1 value. So let's click on the vector, and I can change it to float instead. That'll make it 1 value. And then here on the default value, we need to turn this back to 1. And you can see the texture is still gone. That's because we need to go out of the node group, and we need to turn the scale to 1. So now that'll change the overall size of the material. So let's go back into the node group. Now the other value that I want to control is the metallic. So let's drag the group input way over here, drag it over to the principal shader, and we can take the metallic and put that into the extra socket. So now it says metallic, so that way we can control the metallic values. And then I also want to be able to control the colors. So if I drag the group input back here, this first mix is going to have the colors of the metal. So let's put color A into the extra socket, and then color B into the extra socket. And then if I double click on these to rename them, I'm going to rename this one to metal color 1, and then this one I'll rename to metal color 2. Now, as well as controlling the overall scale of the material, I also just want to be able to control the scratches scale and the base texture scale. So let's drag the group input back here. Let's actually drag it down a bit. So what I can do is add another mapping node after these ones and after these ones, and then we can use the scale values of those mappings to control just those textures. So what I first need to do is hold down the shift key and right click and drag over both of these wires and then let go, and that's going to add a reroute. So I'm rerouting both of these together, so I can now drag this here into the base texture, so they're both going through the reroute. And then I want to do the same thing up here. So I'm going to hold down the shift key and I'm going to right click and drag over these wires and let go. So that's added these to a reroute. So now we just have 2 single wires. So I can now go to the add menu, and we're going to search for a mapping node, and we'll stick the mapping node here between these wires, and then I'll press Shift D to duplicate, and we can drop another mapping node in between these wires. So now this mapping is just controlling these textures, and then this mapping is just controlling these textures. So we can now take this scale, and let's put that into the extra socket. And this one, I want to rename this to just noise scale. And then this one up here, this one is just controlling the scratches, so I'll put the scale into the extra socket, and this one I can double click on this and I can rename this to scratches scale. Now both of these are going to have 3 values. If I go outside of the node group, you can see they have 3 values, but I just want 1 value. So we're going to go back into the node group, and we'll click on the noise scale, and we can change the type to float instead, and then the default value we can turn to 1, and then we'll do the same thing on the scratches scale. So click on the scratches scale, and we can change the type to float, and then the default value we can turn to 1, and then we need to go outside of the node group, and we need to turn the noise scale to 1 and the scratches scale back to 1. So now you can actually see the texture. So let's go back into the node group. Now I also want to be able to control the scratches color. So if I drag the group input way up here, we have this color here on the second mix, and that is going to control the color of the scratches. So we'll put A into the extra socket, and then I can rename this to scratches color. And then I also want to be able to control the roughness of the material. So we have this hue saturation value here, which the value will control the roughness. So we'll put the value into the extra socket here, and then I can double click on this and just rename it to roughness. And then finally, I want to be able to control the bump strengths. So this first bump strength here is changing the noise. So let's put the strength into that extra socket. I can double click on this and rename it to noise strength. Actually, I'm going to call this noise bump strength. And then this bump here, this one is going to control the bump of those scratches. So we'll put the strength into the extra socket here. And this one I can rename to scratches bump strength. So scratches bump strength. So let's just drag the group input way over here underneath the mapping. We'll hit the tab key to go out of the node group, and we'll hit the N key to close the side panel. And that is it for the finished material. So real quick, I'll just review the material. So we have the overall scale of the material. We also can control that metallic value. And then we also have the different colors for the metal. And then we also have the noise scale just to change the size of the noise. So I could make the noise like really small or really big. And then we also have the scratches scale. So I could make the scratches quite big or really small. And then we also have these scratches color, so I could make them kind of like a dark color, or maybe if I wanted to make them look kind of rusty or something, I could maybe turn that to like a slightly red color. Then we have the roughness of the material, and actually if you make it really rough, that looks pretty cool. It's like, it makes the metal look more worn and old. And then we have the noise bump strength, and then finally the scratches bump strength. So that's going to be it for this tutorial, so I hope you enjoyed this, and thank you for watching. And if you'd like to purchase this material and help support the channel, you can get that on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page. And to purchase all of my materials, definitely check out my Ultimate Blender Procedural Material Pack, which comes with all of my procedural materials pre-set up for Blender's asset browser with custom thumbnails, sorted catalogs, and customizable node groups. And you can also check out my procedural material packs, which are just packs of 10 materials, and you can also get all of my materials individually on my Gumroad store. And to learn how to create many more procedural materials, definitely check out my Blender Procedural Material tutorial playlist here on YouTube. The links are all in the description. But I hope you enjoyed this, and thank you for watching.